Before we start, please subscribe to our channel. Now, get ready as we are about to begin. Story 1. I've been a huge fan of MrBeast for years. There's something about the way he gives away all that money that just fascinates me. I mean, who wouldn't want to be one of those lucky people who gets a new car or a house just for being in the right place at the right time? So when I heard that there was going to be a party where everyone was supposed to dress up like their favorite YouTuber, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I ordered a MrBeast shirt and hat from his merch store, and I even went so far as to dye my hair the same bright yellow as his. The party was everything I'd hoped it would be. I got to meet other fans of MrBeast, and we talked about our favorite videos and moments from his channel. But as the night went on, I noticed that there was one guy who kept staring at me. He was dressed in all black, and he had a MrBeast shirt on too, but it looked old and faded. I tried to ignore him, but he kept getting closer and closer. Eventually, he came up to me and said, "Do you know who I am?" I didn't, but I didn't want to be rude, so I asked him. "I'm part of a fan club," he said. "We're the biggest MrBeast fans in the world. We follow him everywhere he goes, and we're always looking for new members." I was a little creeped out by this, but I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and smiled. "You should come with me," he said. "We're having a meeting right now. You could meet some of the other members and see what we're all about." I hesitated for a moment, but then I figured, what harm could it do? I followed him out of the party and into a van that was parked on the street. There were a few other people inside, all dressed like MrBeast, but they looked a lot more intense than the fans I'd been talking to earlier. The van drove us out of town and into the woods. We eventually came to a clearing where there was a big bonfire and a group of people gathered around it. They were all dressed like MrBeast, and they were chanting something I couldn't quite make out. "Welcome to the club," the guy who'd brought me there said. "We're about to start a ritual to show our devotion to MrBeast. Are you ready to join us?" I was starting to get really scared by this point, but I didn't want to make a scene. I just nodded and went along with whatever they told me to do. They gave me a robe to wear and told me to stand in the middle of the circle. Then they started chanting louder and louder, and I felt like the world was spinning around me. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a dark room with no idea how I'd gotten there. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. I stumbled around in the dark until I found a door, but when I opened it, I saw something that made me wish I'd stayed in that room forever. There were people in there, all dressed like MrBeast, but they didn't look right. Their eyes were glowing, and they were muttering something I couldn't understand. And in the center of the room, there was a figure that was even more terrifying. It was a man, but he was dressed in robes and had a mask on that looked like MrBeast's face. He was holding a book that looked like a spell book, and he was chanting in a language I'd never heard before. I realized then that I had stumbled into something that was way beyond my understanding, and that I needed to find a way out of there as quickly as possible. I turned to run, but one of the cult members grabbed me by the arm. "You can't leave now," she said. "You're one of us now." I struggled to break free, but the other cult members were closing in on me. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard a familiar voice calling out from the darkness. "Hey, what's going on in here?" It was a MrBeast lookalike. The cult members turned to look at him, and I took the opportunity to run for the door. I burst through it and kept running until I was back in the woods, far away from that creepy gathering. I never found out what happened to the cult, or why they were so obsessed with MrBeast. All I knew was that I'd never underestimate the power of fandom again. Story 2. I was sitting in my living room, watching Mr. Beast on YouTube like I usually do, when my phone rang. I checked the caller ID, but I didn't recognize the number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" I said tentatively. "Hello, my dear," a woman's voice responded. "My name is Arya, and I'm a witch." I was taken aback by her words. Was this some kind of joke? But there was something in her voice that made me believe she was serious. "A witch?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" "I mean I practice the craft," she explained. "And I've been watching you, dear. I've seen your interest in the occult, your fascination with the unknown. And I believe I can help you with that." I was both intrigued and frightened by her words. How could she know about my interest in the occult? And why did she think I needed her help? What kind of help? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come and see me, and I'll show you," Arya replied cryptically. "I promise you won't regret it." I was hesitant, but at the same time, I couldn't resist the temptation of exploring the mysterious and the unknown. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Arya. She gave me an address in the outskirts of town, in a secluded area surrounded by dense forests. I arrived at the location and followed the directions to a small cottage hidden in the woods. It looked old and run down, with ivy crawling up the walls and a thatched roof that seemed to sag under the weight of time. I hesitated before knocking on the door, but the sound of footsteps inside urged me on. Arya opened the door, and I was struck by how different she looked from what I had expected. I had imagined an old, wizened woman with a pointy hat and a broomstick, but Arya was young and beautiful, with long dark hair and piercing green eyes. "Welcome, my dear," she said, gesturing for me to come inside. As I stepped into the cottage, I noticed the dim lighting and the strange, pungent aroma that filled the air. Arya led me to a small table in the corner of the room, where a black candle burned in a silver holder. "Sit down, dear," she said. "Let's talk about your desires." I sat down and listened as Arya spoke of the powers of the craft and the secrets of the universe. I was both fascinated and frightened by her words, and I felt a growing sense of unease as the minutes ticked by. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Arya's expression changed, and she stood up, her face contorted with fear. "I have to go," she said. "Quickly, before he finds me." "Who? Who is it?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She grabbed my hand and led me to the back of the cottage, where a door led to the forest. "Run," she whispered. "Don't stop until you're far away from here." I didn't know what to do, but the fear in Arya's eyes was enough to make me flee. I burst through the door and ran through the woods, trying to put as much distance between myself and the cottage as possible. As I ran, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, and I turned to see a figure in the shadows. It was a man dressed in black, with a hooded cloak and a silver pendant hanging from his neck. He was the spitting image of Mr. Beast, the YouTuber I had been watching earlier. Story 3. I used to be a huge fan of Mr. Beast. I would watch his videos all day long and dream of the day when I could meet him in person. But one night, my obsession took a terrifying turn. It was late, and I was alone in my apartment, watching a new Mr. Beast video on my phone. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I got up to answer it, and when I opened the door, I was shocked to see a man dressed exactly like Mr. Beast. He grinned at me and asked, "Are you watching Mr. Beast?" I was too scared to answer. The man continued, "Do you want to meet him?" I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? Without waiting for my reply, the man pushed his way into my apartment. I tried to protest, but he was too strong. He led me to my living room and gestured for me to sit down. Then, he took out a notebook and started scribbling something. "What are you doing?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just kept writing, muttering to himself. After a few minutes, he finished and handed me the notebook. Inside was a list of bizarre tasks, all related to MrBeast's videos. "Complete these tasks, and you will meet MrBeast," the man said. I was scared, but also curious. What harm could it do? So, I set off to complete the first task, which was to spend the night in a haunted house. The house was old and abandoned, and as soon as I entered, I could feel a sense of unease. I tried to ignore it and settled down for the night, hoping to catch some sleep. But then, I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was walking towards me. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the footsteps grew louder and closer. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of me. It was a woman, dressed in tattered rags and covered in dirt. She had long, tangled hair and her eyes were sunken and hollow. I screamed and ran out of the house, back to my apartment. When I got there, the man dressed like MrBeast was waiting for me. "Did you complete the task?" he asked. I was too shaken to answer. The man just chuckled and took the notebook from me. Then, he handed me a new task, even more terrifying than the last. I knew then that I was in too deep. I had to find a way out of this before it was too late. Please subscribe and pick another video from our channel to watch next.